You're not our responsibility anymore. Those were the last words my mother ever said to me before she closed the door, and for 15 years, I carried them like a weight I could never quite set down. Tonight, as I stood in the quiet of my entryway, staring through the glass at the two figures on my front porch, I realized something strange. I didn't feel that weight anymore. I felt something else. Something colder. The rain had just started, a light drizzle tapping softly against the tall windows of the house I'd spent a decade building for myself. Every inch earned, every detail chosen with care. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor as I walked toward the door, slow and measured, the way I'd learned to move when everything inside me wanted to rush. Through the frosted glass, I could make out their silhouettes. Older now, smaller somehow. My father's shoulders, once broad and unyielding, seemed to curve inward, like time had folded him in on himself. My mother stood close beside him, clutching her coat tight, her posture tense, uncertain. They knocked again. Not loud, not demanding, just enough to say they were still there. I paused with my hand hovering over the handle. 15 years ago, I stood on the other side of a different door, holding a small suitcase that felt heavier than it should have, listening to those same voices speak about me like I wasn't even in the room. I remember the smell of the house that night. Clean, familiar, like nothing was about to change. But everything did. I didn't cry. Not then. I think part of me believed they'd open the door again, that they'd call me back inside, say it was a mistake, that they didn't mean it. But the porch light clicked off, and the silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. I learned a lot about silence after that. I learned how loud it could be. I learned how it could follow you into crowded rooms, sit beside you on buses, echo in empty apartments. I learned how to survive inside it. The knock came again, a little weaker this time, pulling me back to the present. I turned the handle and opened the door just enough to see their faces clearly. Time had not been kind. My father's hair was almost completely gray now, his eyes tired, searching. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, her carefully kept appearance replaced with something more fragile, more uncertain. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at me, like they were trying to place something they couldn't quite recognize. And I understood then. They didn't know who I was. Of course they didn't. The last time they saw me, I was a scared 13-year-old girl standing on a porch with nowhere to go. The woman standing in front of them now was someone else entirely. I stepped back slightly, opening the door a little wider, just enough to let the light spill out onto the porch. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice calm, steady, the way I'd trained it to be in every room where I needed to be taken seriously. My father cleared his throat, glancing briefly at my mother before speaking. We're sorry to bother you this late," he said, his voice carrying a hesitation I'd never heard from him before. "We were told someone here might be able to help us." I nodded slowly, as if I were considering it, as if I didn't already know exactly how they'd ended up here. News travels in quiet ways. People talk. Names come up. Success leaves a trail, whether you want it to or not. And eventually, if you follow that trail far enough, it leads back to you. "What kind of help?" I asked. My mother stepped forward slightly, her eyes finally meeting mine. There was something in them I didn't expect. Not anger, not pride, something closer to desperation. "We've fallen on hard times," she said softly. "We lost our home. We don't have anywhere else to go." The words hung in the air between us, heavy in a way that felt familiar. I tilted my head just slightly, studying her face, the lines that hadn't been there before, the uncertainty she couldn't quite hide. For a second, I wondered if she remembered that night. If she remembered the way she stood in the doorway, arms crossed, voice firm, telling her 13-year-old daughter that she was no longer their problem. I wondered if she remembered the suitcase, the silence, the way the door sounded when it closed. "I see," I said quietly. I stepped aside just a fraction more, enough that they could see the inside of the house behind me. The warm lighting, the polished floors, the life I'd built piece by piece without them. I saw the way my father's eyes flickered past me, taking it all in, trying to understand how this place, this life, connected to the person standing in front of him. My mother opened her mouth to speak again, but hesitated, like she wasn't sure what to say next. And for the first time, I felt it clearly. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. 15 years ago, they had closed the door on me without looking back. Tonight, they stood on the other side of one, waiting to see if I would do the same. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make them feel it. Then I smiled, just a little, and said, "You should come in out of the rain." I closed the door behind them with a soft click that echoed more loudly than it should have, sealing the rain outside and trapping us together in a space that felt suddenly smaller than it had a moment ago. They stood just inside the entryway, unsure of where to put their hands, their eyes drifting over the high ceilings and the clean lines of the room, taking in details they did not belong to. I could see it in the way my father shifted his weight, in the way my mother kept her purse clutched tightly against her chest like it was the only thing anchoring her. They were not used to being uncertain. Not like this. Not in front of someone like me. "You can leave your coats there," I said, gesturing toward the rack by the wall. My voice sounded calm, even to me. Practiced. Controlled. It was the voice I used in meetings, in negotiations, in every moment where emotion had no place. They hesitated before moving, as if waiting for permission they were not sure they had. My mother slowly slipped off her coat, revealing a sweater that had seen better days, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. My father followed, placing his coat carefully beside hers, both of them moving with a quiet awkwardness that felt unfamiliar and yet strangely expected. I turned and walked toward the living room without checking if they followed. I did not need to. I could hear their footsteps behind me, cautious, measured, like they were stepping into a place where they did not know the rules. The living room was warm, lit by soft lamps that cast a steady glow across the space. A fire flickered quietly in the fireplace, more for atmosphere than necessity, but tonight it added something else. A contrast. They sat on the edge of the couch when I gestured toward it, their posture stiff, their hands resting in their laps like guests who were afraid to touch anything. I took the chair across from them, leaving just enough distance to feel intentional. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence settled between us, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten just slightly before I pushed the feeling away. I had learned how to manage silence, how to let it work for me instead of against me. "Would you like something to drink?" I asked, more out of habit than concern. My mother shook her head quickly. "No, thank you." My father opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, his eyes dropping to the floor. I nodded once, folding my hands loosely in my lap. "You said you needed help," I continued, giving them an opening they seemed both eager for and afraid of. My father cleared his throat again, a nervous habit I did not remember from before. "Yes," he said slowly. "We have had some difficulties." He glanced at my mother, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if encouraging him to continue. "We lost the house," he said finally. The words came out flat, like he had repeated them too many times already. There were some bad decisions, investments that did not work out, and then the medical bills. His voice trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. I tilted my head slightly, listening, not interrupting, not reacting, just letting him speak. "We tried to manage," my mother added softly. "We thought it would turn around, but it did not." She looked up at me then, her eyes searching my face for something. Recognition, maybe. Sympathy. Anything that might make this easier. "We were told that the owner of this house," she hesitated, as if the words felt strange in her mouth, "that you might be willing to help. People in our situation." I almost smiled at that. The owner of this house. Not my name. Not my story. Just a role. A possibility. I leaned back slightly in my chair, studying them in the same way I would study a situation I needed to understand completely before making a decision. Every detail mattered. The way my father avoided my eyes. The way my mother's fingers tightened around the edge of her purse. The way neither of them had asked who I was. "And what kind of help are you asking for?" I asked. My father hesitated again, longer this time. "Just a place to stay," he said finally. "Something temporary. Until we can get back on our feet." Temporary. I let the word settle in my mind, turning it over quietly. I wondered how long they had considered me temporary all those years ago. How easy it had been to decide that I did not fit into their plans anymore. My mother leaned forward slightly, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "We would not be any trouble," she said. "We can help around the house. We just need a little time." I nodded slowly, as if I were considering it carefully, as if I had not already thought about every possible outcome from the moment I saw them standing on my porch. The fire crackled softly behind me, filling the silence that followed. I let it stretch again, just long enough for them to feel the weight of waiting. It was a different kind of waiting than the one I had known at 13. Then, I had waited for a door to open. Tonight, they were waiting for an answer. I shifted slightly in my chair, crossing one leg over the other, my movements deliberate, controlled. You said you were told someone here might help you, I said. Who told you that? My father frowned slightly, caught off guard by the question. A friend, he said after a moment. Someone who mentioned that the owner has a reputation for giving people a second chance. A second chance. The words echoed quietly in my mind. I thought about the nights I had spent wondering what I had done wrong. The years it took to understand that sometimes people do not leave because of what you did. They leave because of who they are. I looked at them again, really. Looked this time, and for the first time since they walked through the door, something shifted. Not in me, in them. My mother's gaze lingered on my face a little longer now, her expression changing slightly, like she was starting to see something she could not quite place. A memory, a resemblance. My father's eyes lifted too, meeting mine for just a second before flickering away again. It was enough. Recognition does not always arrive all at once. Sometimes it comes in pieces. A detail here, a feeling there. I leaned forward just slightly, resting my elbows on my knees, closing the distance between us by an inch that felt like a mile. A second chance, I repeated quietly. That is an interesting idea. I let the words hang there, watching them carefully, seeing the hope begin to form, fragile and uncertain. Then I smiled again, small and controlled, and said, Tell me, have you ever given one? I watched the question land between us and settle into the space like something neither of them was prepared to hold, and for the first time since they stepped inside, they did not know what to say. My father blinked, his brow tightening slightly, as if he was searching for the right answer, the safe answer, the one that would move this conversation in the direction he needed it to go. My mother shifted beside him, her fingers tightening around her purse again, a small movement that told me more than any words could. They were uncomfortable now. Good. Of course we have, my father said after a moment, his voice trying to find its old confidence, but falling just short. Everyone deserves a second chance. I nodded slowly, as if I were considering his words carefully, even though I already knew exactly how much they were worth. Everyone, I repeated quietly. That is a generous belief. My gaze lingered on his face just long enough to make him hold it, just long enough for something unspoken to pass between us. Then I leaned back again, creating distance, returning to that calm, measured posture that kept everything under control. Tell me about your daughter, I said. The change in direction was subtle, but it hit them both immediately. I saw it in the way my mother's eyes flickered, in the way my father's shoulders stiffened just slightly before he could stop himself. It was not the question they expected. Our daughter, my mother repeated, her voice softer now, cautious. Yes, I said simply. You have one, do you not? There was a pause. A longer one this time. Not confusion. Not exactly. Something closer to hesitation. My father cleared his throat again, but the sound felt different now. Less certain. We did, he said finally. The past tense did not surprise me. It did not hurt either. It just confirmed what I already understood. Did. I echoed, my tone neutral, almost curious. What happened? My mother looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper when she answered. She left, she said. The words were simple, clean, carefully chosen. I tilted my head slightly, studying her, the way she avoided my eyes, the way her shoulders curled inward just a fraction more. She left, I repeated. At what age? 13. My father said quickly, as if filling in the detail would make the story more complete, more believable. She was difficult, independent. She made choices we could not support. I let the silence stretch again, just for a moment, just enough for the weight of his explanation to settle. Then I nodded once, slowly. I see, I said. My voice did not change, not even a little, but something in the room did. The fire behind me cracked softly, the sound sharp in the quiet. My mother shifted again, her eyes lifting briefly to meet mine before dropping away just as quickly. It was a long time ago, she added, almost defensively. We did what we thought was best at the time. Best. I let that word sit in my mind, turning it over the same way I had done with temporary earlier. Words have a way of revealing more than people intend. And have you heard from her since? I asked. My father shook his head, his expression tightening. No, he said. She cut all ties. Changed her name, I suppose. We would not even know where to look. I almost smiled at that. Almost. Instead, I leaned forward slightly again, resting my hands together, my gaze steady, deliberate. So you have not seen her in 15 years, I said. And now you find yourselves in need of help. A second chance. The words were calm, but there was something beneath them now. Something sharper, something they were beginning to feel even if they could not yet name it. My mother's eyes lifted again, this time holding mine for a second longer. There it was. That flicker. That moment where recognition begins to form, not as a clear image, but as a feeling that something is not quite right. Why are you asking about her? She said quietly. I did not answer right away. I let the question hang there, the same way I had let every other silence stretch just enough to make it matter. Then I stood up slowly, smoothing my hands over the fabric of my dress, the movement calm, controlled, giving myself a moment to decide exactly how I wanted this to unfold. I walked to the fireplace, turning my back to them briefly as I adjusted a piece of wood that did not need adjusting. It was a small thing, but it gave me space. It gave me time. When I turned back, I saw it more clearly now. The way my mother was watching me. The way my father's expression had shifted from uncertainty to something closer to suspicion. They were starting to see it. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. I took a step closer, closing the distance again. Just enough to make my presence feel intentional, undeniable. I believe in second chances, I said quietly. I built my life on them. That much was true. Every opportunity one took, every risk I survived, every door I opened for myself when no one else would, they were all second chances in their own way. I looked at them both, letting my gaze move from one to the other, steady and unflinching. But I also believe that second chances are not given freely, I continued. They are earned. They are understood. And most importantly, I let the sentence trail off just long enough to draw their attention fully back to me. My mother leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on mine now, searching, almost desperate for clarity. My father's jaw tightened, his hands clasping together more firmly in his lap. They are remembered, I finished softly. The words settled into the room like something heavy and irreversible. For a second, no one moved. No one spoke. Then my mother's expression changed. Not completely, not all at once, but enough. Her eyes widened just slightly, her breath catching in a way she tried to hide, but could not quite manage. I saw the moment it connected. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to make her uneasy. Enough to make her question what she was seeing. Have we met before? She asked, her voice barely steady. I held her gaze, letting the silence stretch one more time, longer now, deeper, before I answered. Yes, I said quietly. We have. I did not respond right away, and that silence was not hesitation, it was intention, because for the first time in 15 years, they were the ones waiting for me, watching my face, trying to understand what I would do next, and I wanted them to feel every second of that uncertainty, the same way I had once stood outside with nowhere to go, wondering what came after the door closed. I walked slowly past them toward the window, my reflection faint in the glass as the rain continued to fall outside, steady and quiet, like time itself moving forward without asking anyone for permission. You came here asking for help, I said calmly, my voice carrying across the room without effort, and I could hear the shift behind me, the way they leaned in just slightly, holding on to every word now. You asked for a place to stay? Something temporary. I turned back to face them, my expression unchanged, controlled, measured, the same way I had learned to present myself in every room where decisions mattered. And you believe I am the kind of person who gives people second chances. My father swallowed, his hands clasping tighter together, his posture no longer uncertain but careful, as if every movement now had to be considered. We were told you were, he said quietly. We were told you help people who need it. I nodded once, acknowledging the statement without confirming it. I do, I said. Sometimes. My mother's eyes lit with something fragile, something that almost looked like relief, but it did not reach her whole face. Not yet. Not fully. Then you understand, she said quickly, her voice softer, more urgent. Now, you understand how things can go wrong, how people can make decisions they regret. I held her gaze, steady, unblinking, letting her words sit exactly where they were. I understand very well how decisions shape lives, I said quietly. The room fell silent again, but it was not the same silence as before. This one was heavier. This one carried memory. I took a step closer, Not enough to close the distance completely, just enough to make it clear that what came next mattered. When I was 13, I began, my voice even, almost detached, like I was describing something that had happened to someone else. I stood outside a house with a suitcase that was too heavy for me to carry for long. I remember thinking it was temporary, that someone would come back for me, that someone would change their mind. My mother's breath caught softly, and I saw her hand tighten again around the edge of her purse. My father did not move at all. He just listened. No one did. I continued. The porch light turned off. The door stayed closed. And that was the moment I understood something important. I paused, not for effect, but because the memory itself carried its own weight, even now. I understood that I was on my own. I let the words settle, letting them hear it without raising my voice, without forcing emotion into it. It did not need that. The truth rarely does. So I learned, I said. I learned how to work, how to think, how to survive without waiting for someone to come back. I gestured lightly around the room, not dramatically, just enough to connect the past to the present. Everything you see here came from that moment. My father finally shifted, his shoulders lowering slightly, as if something inside him had given way under the weight of what I was saying. My mother looked down, unable to hold my gaze now, her expression tight, conflicted, searching for something that would make this easier to accept. We did not know it would be like that, she said softly. We thought. She stopped again, because even now, she could not finish that sentence in a way that sounded right. I nodded slowly. You thought I would be fine, I said. It was not a question. It did not need to be. My father exhaled, long and quiet, his eyes dropping briefly before lifting again to meet mine. We thought you were strong, he said. We thought you would figure it out. I almost smiled at that, but there was no warmth in it. And I did, I said simply. That is the part you got right. The silence that followed was different now. It was no longer uncertain. It was full, complete. There was nothing left unsaid in the space between us, only the consequences of what had already been done. My mother lifted her head again, her eyes softer now, but also more fragile, like she understood that whatever came next would not be simple, would not be easy. Evelyn, she said carefully, her voice carrying a note of something that had not been there before, something closer to humility. We cannot change what happened. I nodded once. No, I agreed. You cannot. My father leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees now, his posture no longer guarded but open in a way that felt unfamiliar for him. But we are here now, he said. We are asking you for help. There it was again. Not hidden this time. Not softened. Just the truth, placed directly between us. I looked at him for a long moment, then at my mother, taking in every detail, every shift in expression, every sign that they understood exactly where they stood now. Then I stepped back again, returning to my place, my space, the position where everything was clear. You are, I said quietly. And that changes everything. My mother's eyes lifted quickly at that, searching my face for meaning, for direction, for anything that would tell her what I was going to decide. My father held still, waiting, the same way I had once waited, the roles fully reversed now, the balance shifted in a way that could not be undone. I let the silence stretch one more time, longer than before, long enough for them to feel the weight of it settle into their bones. Then I spoke again, my voice calm, controlled, unmistakably certain. Because now, I said, you are not deciding what happens to me. I held their gaze, steady, unflinching. I am deciding what happens to you. The words stayed in the air long after I said them, not because they were loud, but because they were final. And I could see the exact moment they understood that this was no longer a conversation they could guide, no longer a situation they could reshape with explanations or soften language. My father sat back slightly, his shoulders lowering in a way that felt less like defeat and more like acceptance, while my mother remained still, her eyes fixed on me as if she was trying to find something familiar again, something she could hold on to that would make this easier. Evelyn, she said quietly, her voice careful, almost fragile now, we are not asking you to forget what happened. I tilted my head just slightly, considering her words, not dismissing them, but not accepting them either. No, I said calmly. You are not. My father nodded once, slowly, as if agreeing with something unspoken. We know we cannot change the past, he added. We are only asking for a chance to make things right. I let that phrase sit between us, turning it over in my mind the same way I had done with every other word they had chosen tonight. Make things right. It sounded simple when said out loud. It always does. But simplicity is often the first thing people reach for when the truth is too complicated to face directly. I took a step toward the window again, not because I needed the view, but because movement allowed me to control the rhythm of the moment, to decide when to speak and when to let silence do the work instead. The rain had grown steadier now, tracing thin lines down the glass, blurring the lights from the street beyond into something softer, something distant. Do you remember that night? I asked without turning around. The question was not loud, but it was precise, and it landed exactly where I intended it to. Behind me, I heard a shift, the quiet sound of someone adjusting their posture, preparing for something they could not avoid. Yes, my father said after a moment, his voice lower now, stripped of any attempt to control how it sounded. We remember. I nodded slightly, still facing the window, letting that answer exist without interruption. Good, I said quietly. Because I do too. I turned back to them then, my expression unchanged, but my focus sharper now, more deliberate. I remember standing there. I continued. I remember thinking that if I just waited long enough, someone would open the door again. That someone would say it was a mistake. My mother closed her eyes briefly, the reaction immediate, involuntary, like the memory had reached her before she could prepare for it. My father did not look away this time. He held my gaze, even though it was clear it was not easy for him. No one did, I said. And that was the moment everything changed. I walked back toward my chair, sitting down slowly, crossing one leg over the other, returning to that composed posture that had carried me through years of decisions far more complicated than this one. You say you want to make things right. I continued, my voice steady, even. But you need to understand something first. I let the sentence pause, not for effect, but because what came next mattered more than anything else I had said tonight. There is no version of this where things go back to the way they were, I said. That version ended 15 years ago. My mother nodded quickly, almost too quickly, as if agreeing would make the situation less fragile. We know, she said. We are not expecting that. I watched her carefully, noting the way she leaned forward slightly, the way her hands finally loosened their grip on her purse, as if she was trying to show openness, willingness. Then what are you expecting? I asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight, and I saw it land in the way my father's expression tightened again, in the way he glanced briefly at my mother before answering. A chance, he said. Just a chance to stay, to get back on our feet. We are not asking for anything more than that. Temporary again. Always temporary. I nodded slowly, as if I were considering it carefully, even though I had already thought through every possible outcome from the moment I opened the door. A place to stay, I repeated. In this house. My mother followed my words with a small nod, her eyes searching mine again, looking for any sign of direction, of decision. I leaned back slightly, my fingers resting lightly against the arm of the chair, my gaze steady. Do you know how many people have asked me for that? I asked. They did not answer. They did not need to. More than you would expect, I said. People who made bad decisions. People who lost things. People who believed they deserved another chance. I paused, letting that sink in, letting them understand that they were not unique in this request, that their situation, while difficult, was not exceptional in the way they might have hoped. And I have helped some of them, I continued. Not because they asked, not because they needed it, but because they understood something important. My father leaned forward slightly now, his attention fully fixed on me, his expression focused in a way that told me he was listening for something specific, something that would tell him what to say next. What is that? He asked quietly. I held his gaze for a moment before answering. They understood why they were there, I said. Not just the circumstances, not just the situation, but the choices that led them there. The room fell silent again, but this time it was different. This silence was not empty. It was full of understanding, of realization that was still forming, still taking shape. My mother looked down at her hands again, her voice softer when she spoke. We made wrong choices, she said. We see that now. I watched her for a moment, then shifted my gaze to my father. Do you? I asked. The question was direct, unavoidable, and it forced him to respond without deflection. He took a breath, slow and controlled, then nodded. Yes, he said. We do. I studied him for a long moment, not searching for perfection, not expecting certainty, but looking for something real, something honest. Then I nodded once, slowly, acknowledging the answer without rewarding it. Good, I said quietly, because that is where this begins. I let the silence stretch one more time, long enough for them to feel the shift, long enough for them to understand that what came next would not be given, it would be decided. Then I spoke again, my voice calm, measured, and final. If you stay here, I said, it will not be because you need help. I held their gaze, steady, unflinching. It will be because I decide you have earned it. The house was quiet the next morning in a way that felt different from the silence I had known growing up, because this silence was not empty. It was controlled, deliberate, shaped by routines that existed long before they arrived and would continue long after they were gone. I woke early, as I always did, the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains, casting a pale glow across the room. For a moment, I lay still, listening, not for footsteps, not for voices, just for the rhythm of a space that belonged entirely to me. Then I got up, moving through my usual routine without hesitation, without interruption, because that was the point. Nothing about my life adjusted to accommodate them. When I walked into the kitchen, the air was still, untouched, exactly as I had left it the night before. I poured coffee into my cup, the familiar sound grounding, steady, something I had relied on for years. I did not rush. I did not check the time. I simply moved through each action with the same precision I always had. It was not until I sat down at the table that I heard it. A faint movement upstairs. A door opening. Footsteps that were slower, more careful than they used to be. I did not look up. I did not react. I just took a sip of my coffee and waited. A few minutes later, they appeared in the doorway. My mother first, her hair slightly out of place, her expression uncertain, as if she was not sure whether she was allowed to enter. My father followed, his posture stiff, his eyes moving across the room as though he were still trying to understand where he was. They paused there, just inside the kitchen, not speaking, not sitting, waiting. I let them stand there for a moment longer than necessary, then gestured lightly toward the chairs across from me. You can sit, I said calmly. They moved quickly, almost gratefully, taking their seats without question, their movements quiet, controlled. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for something, anything that would tell them how this day would unfold. I set my cup down gently and looked at them for the first time that morning. Breakfast is at 7, I said. If you want coffee, it is already made. My mother nodded quickly. Thank you, she said, her voice softer than usual. My father gave a small nod as well, reaching for a cup as if he was afraid the opportunity might disappear if he hesitated. I watched them for a moment as they adjusted to the space, the routine, the unspoken rules that governed everything here. Then I spoke again. There is something you need to understand about how things work in this house, I said. They both looked up immediately, their attention sharp, focused. Everything here has a place, I continued. Everything has a purpose. That includes you, for as long as you are here. My father straightened slightly, his expression attentive, as if he was preparing to follow instructions he did not yet fully understand. What would you like us to do? He asked. I held his gaze for a moment, then answered simply. For now, you observe, I said. You pay attention. You learn. My mother frowned slightly, not in disagreement, but in confusion. Learn what? She asked. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands loosely in front of me. Learn how this house runs, I said. Learn what it takes to maintain it. Learn what it means to be responsible for something that does not depend on anyone else to survive. The words were calm, but they carried weight, and I saw it land in the way my father's expression shifted, in the way my mother's shoulders lowered just slightly as she absorbed it. We can help, she said quickly. We want to help. I nodded once, acknowledging the statement without accepting it yet. Wanting to help and knowing how to help are not the same thing, I said. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was not uncomfortable. It was focused, intentional. They were listening now in a way they had not before, not just hearing my words, but trying to understand what was behind them. I stood up slowly, carrying my cup to the sink, rinsing it with the same measured movements I had practiced for years. You will start with simple things, I said, not turning around. Small responsibilities. Nothing complicated. I dried the cup and placed it back, exactly where it belonged before facing them again. And you will do them well, I added. My father nodded immediately. Of course, he said. My mother followed, her agreement quieter, but just as certain. I studied them for a moment longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Good, I said. Then we will see what happens next. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving them there at the table, their coffee untouched, their posture still careful, their expressions caught somewhere between relief and uncertainty. Behind me, I could hear the faint sound of movement as they adjusted, as they began to settle into a routine that was not theirs, in a house that was not theirs, under rules they did not create. And as I moved through the hallway, I realized something that felt both distant and familiar at the same time. For the first time since they arrived, they were not asking what I would give them. They were waiting to see what they could earn. The first few days passed without disruption, and that in itself was something I noticed, not because it surprised me, but because of how carefully they were trying to fit into a life that had no empty spaces for them. I watched it the same way I watched everything else, quietly, without interference, observing how they moved through routines that were not theirs, how they adjusted their habits to match a rhythm they did not yet fully understand. My father woke early, earlier than I expected, lingering in the kitchen as if he was trying to anticipate what came next, while my mother followed more slowly, her movements measured, deliberate, as though she was afraid of making a mistake she could not correct. They did not ask questions. They did not assume anything. They simply waited, paying attention to the smallest details, the placement of objects, the timing of tasks, the structure that defined everything around them. And I let them, because that was the point. On the third morning, I gave them their first real responsibility. It was nothing complicated, nothing that required explanation beyond what was obvious. The back garden needs attention, I said, standing by the kitchen doorway, my voice calm. Neutral, as if I were assigning something routine, something expected. They both looked up immediately, their focus sharp, ready. There are tools in the shed, I continued. Everything you need is there. My father nodded right away, standing up without hesitation, while my mother followed, her expression more cautious, but determined. They did not ask how long it would take. They did not ask what specifically needed to be done. They simply accepted the task and moved toward it, as if understanding that the details were part of what they needed to figure out on their own. I watched them from the window as they stepped into the garden, the morning light casting long shadows across the grass, the space itself untouched, waiting. It was not overgrown, not neglected, but it required care, attention, consistency. The kind of work that reveals how someone approaches responsibility when no one is standing over them, telling them what to do next. My father moved first, scanning the area, assessing, while my mother lingered near the edge, her eyes following his movements before she began to help, slower, more tentative. They worked quietly, side by side, not speaking much, their movements gradually becoming more coordinated as they adjusted to the task. I did not go outside. I did not offer guidance. I simply watched, noting the way they approached each detail, the way they corrected themselves when something was not right, the way they continued even when the work became repetitive, unremarkable. Hours passed. The sun rose higher. And still, they worked. When they came back inside, there was a difference in them, subtle, but clear. My father's posture was slightly more relaxed, his movements less guarded, while my mother's expression held something new, something closer to quiet focus than uncertainty. They stood in the doorway again, not as hesitant as before, but still waiting. I set my book down on the table and looked at them. It is done, my father said simply. I nodded once, not asking for details, not inspecting the work immediately. Good, I said. That was all. But it was enough. I saw the shift again, the way something settled into place, the way they understood that approval here did not come with praise. It came with acknowledgement, measured and precise. Later that afternoon, I walked through the garden myself, taking in the changes, the subtle improvements, the evidence of effort rather than perfection. It was not flawless. It was not meant to be, but it was consistent, intentional, and that mattered more. That evening, they joined me in the living room without being told, their movements more natural now, though still careful, still aware of boundaries they had not yet fully tested. My mother sat on the edge of the chair, her hands resting in her lap, while my father remained standing for a moment longer before taking his seat. There was a pause, a quiet space where something could have been said, but was not. Then my mother spoke. "We finished the garden," she said softly, not repeating what my father had already told me, but acknowledging it in her own way. I looked at her, then at him, holding their gaze for a moment before nodding again. I said. My father shifted slightly, as if preparing to say something more, something that had been building throughout the day. "We are trying," he said finally. The words were simple, but they carried something real this time, something that did not rely on explanation or defense. Just a statement. I held his gaze for a moment longer, considering it, weighing it, not against the past, but against what I was seeing now. "I know," I said quietly. The room fell silent again, but it was not the same silence as before. It was steadier, more grounded, not filled with uncertainty, but with something else, something that was still forming, still taking shape. I leaned back slightly, my posture relaxed, but my focus unchanged. "This is how it works," I said calmly. "You do what is asked. You do it well, and you wait." My mother nodded slowly, absorbing the words, understanding that this was not a process they could rush, not something they could influence with emotion or explanation. My father gave a small nod as well, his expression steady, more certain than it had been before. And as I watched them sit there, not asking for more, not pushing beyond what had been given, I realized something that had not been true when they first arrived. They were no longer just waiting for help. They were learning what it meant to deserve it. By the end of the first week, the rhythm had settled into something that no longer felt temporary, even if we all understood that it was, and I could see the difference in them not in what they said, but in what they no longer needed to say. They did not ask for direction as often. They did not wait in doorways as if unsure whether they were allowed to enter. They moved more naturally now, though still with a careful awareness that this space was not theirs. And that awareness mattered. It always would. I continued to give them small responsibilities, never all at once, never enough to make them comfortable, but enough to show me how they adapted, how they thought, how they handled things when they believed no one was watching. The kitchen was next. Not cooking, not yet, but preparation, organization, maintenance, the kind of work that reveals attention to detail, patience, consistency. My mother took to it first, her movements slower but precise, her focus steady in a way that told me she understood the importance of doing things correctly, not quickly. My father followed, less natural in the space, but determined, watching her, adjusting, learning without being told. I did not correct them when something was slightly off. I did not intervene when they hesitated. I let them find their own rhythm within mine. Because that was the difference. They were not creating something new. They were learning how to exist within something that already existed without them. One evening, as I returned from work, I paused in the doorway of the kitchen without announcing myself. They were there, both of them, moving through the space with a quiet coordination that had not been there before. My mother was arranging dishes, placing each one carefully, while my father wiped down the counter, his movements steady, unhurried. They did not see me at first, and that was when I saw it most clearly. Not effort, not obligation. Habit. It had begun to form. Not fully, not completely, but enough to matter. I stepped inside, and they both turned immediately, the awareness returning, the careful posture settling back into place. "You are home," my mother said softly. I nodded once, setting my bag down, my eyes moving across the space, taking in every detail without comment. Everything was in order, not exactly as I would have done it, but consistent, thoughtful, intentional. "Yes," I said. That was all. But they watched me, waiting, the same way they had on the first day, though now there was something different in it. Not fear, not uncertainty, anticipation. I walked further into the room, running my fingers lightly along the edge of the counter, checking without making it obvious that I was checking. Then I looked at them. "This is better," I said. The words were simple, but they carried more weight than anything else I had said to them that week. My father nodded slowly, his expression steady, while my mother exhaled softly, a breath she had been holding without realizing it. "We are trying to learn," she said. I studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "I can see that," I replied. The silence that followed was different again. Not heavy, not uncertain, just present, real. Later that night, as we sat in the living room, something shifted in a way that had not happened before. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. My father spoke without being prompted. "We have been talking," he said, his voice calm, measured, not defensive, not hesitant. I turned my attention to him, waiting. "About what happened," he continued. My mother sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze steady, not avoiding mine this time. "We did not understand then what we understand now," she added quietly. I did not respond immediately. I let the words exist without interruption, without encouragement. Because understanding, when it comes too easily, is often not understanding at all. "We thought we were making a practical decision," my father said. "We thought we were choosing what was manageable, what made sense at the time." I tilted my head slightly, considering his words, not accepting them, not rejecting them, just listening. "And now?" I asked. The question was simple, but it required more than explanation. It required something else, something they had not yet fully given. My mother looked at me, her expression steady, but softer now, more open. "Now we see that we chose convenience over responsibility," she said. "We chose ourselves over you." The words settled into the room with a clarity that had not been there before. No hesitation, no attempt to soften it, just truth. I held her gaze for a moment longer than usual, measuring not just what she said, but how she said it. Then I nodded once. "That is closer," I said quietly. My father exhaled slowly, his posture shifting, not in relief, but in recognition that they had finally said something that mattered. "We cannot undo that," he said, "but we can face it." I leaned back slightly, my hands resting calmly in my lap, my expression unchanged. "Facing something and understanding it are not the same," I said, "but it is a start." The room fell silent again, but it was not uncomfortable. It was steady, grounded, like something had finally aligned in a way that could not be undone. I looked at them both, taking in the way they sat, the way they held themselves now, not as people asking for something, but as people beginning to understand what it costs. "This is not about proving anything to me," I continued. "It is about proving something to yourselves." My mother nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. "We know," she said. My father followed, his agreement quiet, but firm. And for the first time since they arrived, I believed them. Not completely, not without question, but enough to see the difference. Enough to recognize that something had changed, not in the past, not in what had been done, but in what they were willing to face now. And as I sat there, watching them, I realized something that had not been true before. They were no longer trying to earn a place in my house. They were trying to understand why they had lost it in the first place. By the second week, the house no longer felt like it was holding its breath around them. And that change was not sudden or dramatic. It was gradual, built through repetition, through consistency, through the quiet understanding that formed. When people stopped performing and started adapting, I noticed it in small ways first. The way my mother no longer paused at the edge of a room before entering. The way my father began tasks without waiting to be told. The way they spoke to each other in lower tones, not out of fear, but out of awareness, as if they understood that this space required a different kind of presence. I did not comment on it. I did not acknowledge it directly, because progress that is named too quickly often disappears just as fast. Instead, I continued as I always had, maintaining the structure, the expectations, the rhythm that defined everything here. But I also began to change something else. The tasks I gave them became less about observation and more about responsibility. Not larger in scale, but deeper in impact. The kind of work that required not just attention, but ownership. One morning, I handed my father a set of documents, simple at first glance, but precise in detail. "These need to be reviewed and organized," I said. "There are discrepancies. I want them identified." He took the papers carefully, his expression focused, not intimidated, but aware that this was different from anything I had asked before. "I understand," he said, and I believed that he did. My mother watched from the table, her gaze moving between us, understanding that this was a shift, that something had changed in the way I was engaging with them. Later that day, I found her in the study, not because she had been told to be there, but because she had chosen to be. She was not working on anything specific. She was observing, reading through old notes, familiarizing herself with the systems I had built. When she saw me, she did not stand up immediately, did not retreat. She simply looked at me and said, "There is more to this house than what we see." I nodded once. "There always is," I replied. That evening, my father brought the documents back to me. He did not explain immediately. He did not justify. He simply placed them on the table and said, "There are 3 inconsistencies." I marked them. I reviewed his notes in silence, my eyes moving across the pages, taking in not just what he found, but how he approached it. The details were correct. The conclusions were careful, not assumed. When I looked up, he was watching me, not with expectation, but with focus, waiting for direction. "This is accurate," I said. He nodded once, accepting the acknowledgement without reaction. But my mother exhaled softly beside him, as if she had been holding something in place, waiting to see if it would settle or fall apart. I closed the folder and set it aside. "You are beginning to understand," I said. My father met my gaze, steady, grounded. "We are trying to," he replied. And this time, it did not sound like an explanation. It sounded like a statement of intent. The next shift came without announcement. It happened one afternoon when I returned earlier than expected. The house was quiet, but not empty. I could hear movement in the kitchen, soft, consistent, unhurried. When I stepped inside, I saw them both there, not waiting, not reacting to my presence immediately. They were working. My mother was preparing something simple, organized, methodical, while my father handled the details around her, not directing, not correcting, just supporting. It was not perfect. It was not seamless. But it was real. They noticed me after a moment, and when they did not stop what they were doing. They acknowledged me with a glance, a small nod, and then continued. That was new. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, taking it in, not the task itself, but the way they approached it, the way they existed within it. Then I stepped forward, placing my bag down quietly, not interrupting, not changing the flow of what was already happening. "Dinner will be ready soon," my mother said, her voice calm, steady, not asking for approval, just informing. I nodded once. "All right," I said. That was all. But it marked something, a shift that could not be undone. Later, as we sat together, the conversation came without hesitation, without the careful distance that had defined the earlier days. My father spoke first. "We have been thinking about what you said," he began. I looked at him, waiting. "About responsibility," he continued. "About understanding what it means beyond just saying the words." My mother nodded beside him. "We thought we understood it before," she added. "But we only understood it when it was convenient." I let the words settle, not interrupting, not guiding. "And now?" I asked. My father held my gaze, not looking away this time. "Now we understand that responsibility does not end when it becomes difficult," he said. "It begins there." The room was quiet again, but not heavy, just clear, defined. I leaned back slightly, my posture relaxed, but my focus unchanged. "That is closer," I said quietly. My mother looked at me, her expression softer now, but not fragile, stronger, more certain. "We cannot change what we did," she said, "but we can change how we live now." I studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Yes," I said, "you can." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something that had not been there before. Not forgiveness, not resolution, something else, something quieter, more lasting. And as I sat there, watching them, I realized that the question was no longer whether they could stay. The question had become something different entirely. Whether they could remain as they were becoming, or whether, given enough time, they would return to who they had been. By the 3rd week, the house had settled into something that no longer felt like an adjustment, and that was when I knew the real decision had to be made, not about whether they could stay, but about what staying actually meant, because there is a difference between existing in a space and belonging to it, and I had spent years learning that difference the hard way. That morning, I did not follow the usual routine. I did not sit at the table first. I did not wait for them to come to me. Instead, I stood in the living room, looking out at the garden they had worked on, the lines cleaner now, the care more visible, the result of quiet effort repeated day after day. When they came downstairs, they noticed immediately that something was different. Not because I said anything, but because the rhythm had changed. My mother paused at the bottom of the stairs, her hand resting lightly on the railing, while my father stood just behind her, his posture straight, attentive. "Is everything all right?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was a note in it that had not been there before. Awareness. I turned to face them, my expression neutral, but my focus precise. "Sit," I said. They did, without hesitation, taking their places across from me, not at the edge of the room this time, but within it. That mattered. I let the silence stretch for a moment, not to create tension, but to allow the moment to settle into something real. It has been 3 weeks, I said finally. My voice was even, controlled, the same tone I had used from the beginning, but this time it carried something more. Finality. They both nodded, waiting. You have followed the routines, I continued. You have taken responsibility for what was given to you. You have not asked for more than what was offered. My mother's hands rested calmly in her lap now, not clenched, not uncertain. My father met my gaze directly, not with defiance, not with expectation, just with presence. We have tried to do what is right, he said. I nodded once. You have, I replied. The words were simple, but they carried weight, and I saw it in the way they both reacted, not with relief, but with understanding. Because they knew this was not the end of the conversation. It was the beginning of the decision. I took a slow breath, not because I needed it, but because I wanted the moment to be clear, deliberate, without confusion. When you came here, I said, you asked for a place to stay. Something temporary. My mother nodded softly. Yes. I held her gaze for a moment, then continued. And I told you that if you stayed, it would not be because you needed help. It would be because I decided you had earned it. My father leaned forward slightly, not interrupting, just listening. I let the silence settle again, then spoke the words that had been forming since the moment I opened the door that night. You have earned the chance to stay, I said. The words landed, and this time, the reaction was different. Not immediate relief, not visible emotion, just stillness, because they understood that what came next mattered more than what had just been said. But not. Here, I added. That was when it shifted. My mother's eyes widened slightly, not in panic, but in surprise. My father's expression tightened, just for a moment, before he steadied it again. I did not rush to explain. I let them sit with it, the same way I had once sat with a door closing, with no explanation at all. Then I continued. This house is not a place where you start over, I said calmly. It is a place that was built from what I went through. It is not meant to be shared in that way. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. The meaning was clear. My mother swallowed, her voice softer when she spoke. Then what does this mean? I looked at her, then at him, making sure they both heard it exactly as I intended. It means you are not being sent away, I said. It means you are being given something else. My father's brow furrowed slightly, not in confusion, but in focus. What? He asked. I stood up slowly, walking to the side table where a small folder rested, something I had prepared days ago, long before this moment arrived. I picked it up and returned, placing it carefully in front of them. It means you will have a place, I said. A small one. Modest. Something you can maintain on your own. Something that depends on your effort, not mine. My mother looked down at the folder, her hands hesitating before touching it, as if she was not sure she had the right. My father opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the documents inside, taking in the details. This is, he began, then stopped, looking up at me. It is a lease, I said. Paid for 6 months. After that, it is yours to manage. The room was quiet again, but it was not heavy. It was clear, defined. My mother's eyes filled, not with tears, but with something deeper, something harder to name. You are helping us, she said softly. I shook my head once. No, I replied. I am giving you the chance to stand on your own. The same way I had to. My father closed the folder slowly, his expression steady, grounded, not overwhelmed, but present. And if we fail? He asked. I held his gaze, not unkind, but unwavering. Then you will know exactly. Why? I said. The words were not harsh. They were honest. That was all they needed to be. My mother nodded slowly, her fingers resting on the edge of the folder, her posture no longer uncertain, but still accepting. My father followed, his agreement quiet, but firm. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. Not who they had been, not who they were trying to be, but who they had chosen to become. I stepped back, creating space again, returning everything to its proper place. You can stay here until the end of the week, I said. After that, you move forward. I turned toward the window, the garden visible beyond the glass, the lines they had shaped still holding, still consistent. And for the first time, the silence that followed was not about what had been lost or what had been done. It was about what came next. And that was no longer something I needed to decide for them.